We work with over 130 general counsels worldwide. What that gives us is a unique ability to see the key challenges they have in implementing a transformation agenda. Here we share the top 10 tips that we see in securing budget and resources to drive any transformation agenda, but obviously in particular, technology enablement. When we look across our client base, what we find is that although 98% of general counsels rate transformation as critical for the future success of their function, ultimately the vast majority aren't implementing anything yet. In fact, only a quarter are, and most of those are still very early in their transformation journey. Interestingly, when we look at what are the root causes of some of the issues that GCs are trying to face, what we see very clearly is that they don't have a sophisticated system of record or any technology tools to really enable their function to do more with less. As a result, they're often many years behind the expectations that have been set by more mature functions in this area. Now, although most general counsels know that they should be investing further in technology, largely most general counsels aren't quite clear on what they should be doing. And then secondly, and in most cases more challengingly, how to get it done. When we looked at our research, what we found very clearly was that those functions who spend more on technology are not surprisingly dramatically more mature in terms of their transformation journey. So on average, the legal functions spend about 2% of their budget on technology. Those who are rated as more progressive or advanced are spending 6 or 8%. So often, 3 to 4 times as much on technology. The good news is that most general counsels are aware of this. So as you can see here, on average, general counsels increase in investment in technology over the next 2 years will be 111%, albeit from a very low base, but still quite a startling increase in investment. However, when we look at how general counsels are focusing on that investment or trying to get this done, what we're seeing is incredibly common mistakes. If I highlight a few of these here for you, first off is that all legal functions are very busy. In fact, ironically, the reason they want to invest in technology is to help them get more done with less. Yet what they often fall into is what we call the tomorrow fallacy. The tomorrow fallacy is quite simple, is that if I could just get the board papers off my desk, if I could just get this M&A transaction off my desk, if I could just get some of this day-to-day work off my desk, I'll finally have time to actually invest in the function. What we find is functions who fall for that trap never make any progress because there's always one more thing to do. Certainly, functions who under-resource this initiative, so are unable to ring-fence some of their time and capacity, and perhaps a member of their team's capacity likewise make very limited progress because most of them are already working too much, and there's not much slack left in the system to invest in driving improvement in the function. The obvious insight there is that general counsels need to change gears and focus from working in the function to working on the function to make progress. When we look at securing resources, as we'll see in a moment, this is the biggest challenge that GCs suggest that they have. We will talk through some of the issues and opportunities there. But on the whole, what we see is that legal functions center the business case for additional resources on the impact on the function. So they'll say, to put it simply, look, we're incredibly busy, the team's overworked, we need more resources to help. What they don't realize is that largely the organization doesn't currently value the legal function to the extent the legal function would hope. So the survey suggests that 76% of stakeholders say they don't feel that they're getting value based on the time and money they're spending with the legal function. Secondly, the CFO or CEO or whoever is the budget holder hears that story day in, day out. And they know that if they say yes to legal, they then need to say yes to everyone else. And so ultimately they default to no. Lastly is that they underinvest on the tail end here around adoption of the technology and the rollout of the technology fails because they haven't resourced the adoption and set themselves up for success there. When we surveyed our clients and said, look, across the life cycle of a transformation project, what are the biggest issues? What you can clearly see here is that, look, there's quite a lot of folks, about 30%, who are struggling to know where to start and where to find the time. But as you can see, a disproportionate amount of them are struggling on securing business buy-in and getting budget. Lastly, as I pointed out a moment ago, is change management is difficult in any organization, and in most part, legal functions haven't built much capability in that area, and so fail on that point. So let's start with insight number one. When we see general counsels try to buy technology or invest in this space, what we find is that they don't have an existing muscle there. They haven't really done this before. That drives them to run in circles somewhat. So they may go and speak to procurement, go speak to IT, try and speak to their team, try and speak to their business, try and speak to their boss to try and get consensus. However, when we point out to them that they buy things every day and this is no different, suddenly the story becomes a lot simpler, because anything you buy really requires three very simple things. You understand the problem, and the problem may be that you've got someone's thinking about suing you, or the problem may be that your team's buried in the weeds of routine work. Either way, you need to understand the problem and not fall for what we call agenda by vendor, which is that a vendor, whether it's a technology vendor or other vendor, sells you that you should buy their solution in absence of you feeling that is your top priority. Secondly, is you got to identify a credible solution and have confidence that the solution will solve your problem in a cost-effective and risk-effective way. Third, you need to find a way to fund it, and we'll touch on this later. But really, that's all you need. And what we find is that general counsels often overcomplicate things because they feel that they haven't bought this previously, so they don't know the process by which they should go about buying it. When we look at how to fund this, what we find is really interesting is that most general counsels have access to some sort of external spend budget, but because historically they've labeled it, law firm budget or external spend budget or something like that, they think it should only be spent on law firms. That made sense in the context of an era where there was only really one service you spend your dollars on, which is largely law firms. It doesn't make sense now when there's a plethora of tools or services or technology that you should access. What's the real purpose of that budget? It's to get legal work done. And so you should spend that budget on the activities that or resources that you think are going to give the highest ROI to the business in terms of managing risk and getting legal work done. Often that's not paying a partner $800 an hour to provide you a bit of advice on something that you or a member of your team may have a reasonably good degree of understanding on, and it's providing something that automates routine works and levers up your team to have greater impact, or providing a contract management system or a matter management system or a variety of other tools that really legal functions should have always had and largely should be funded out of the budget the business gives you to get work done. The second thing here is that when you're thinking about getting resources for the most effective work done, historically, what's been outsourced is the things that you felt are perhaps highest risk from a legal risk perspective. What that means is you're essentially down-tiering your team into the lower risk or lowest impact work. What we're seeing progressive functions doing is something different. They're saying, actually, how do we outsource or automate the more routine work and then elevate our team to have more strategic impact? And in doing so, we'll reduce our dependency on external law firms. Now, when you think about that budget, it's not only technology and law firms. You could look at strategic secondments. You can look at productized legal services, which are a hybrid of automation or technology with professional services, and of course, hiring additional lawyers to insource work that perhaps you've outsourced previously. Lastly, you could think about training and development. Now, when we see general counsels go to get additional budget because they maybe don't have an external spend budget, they certainly, in most cases, will not have a line item allocated to technology. They naively think that the conversation with the CEO or CFO is going to be pretty straightforward, because the last time they went to get additional budget, it was to fund a class action litigation or something like that. And that there was a circumstance that really there was no choice. Whether they liked it or not, the CFO or CEO needed to provide resources to manage that key risk. The interesting thing is when you take pretty much anything else to a CFO or CEO, their default position is no. In fact, they see a large proportion of their role being saying no to the business on new initiatives and new budget spends, and they'll be compensated in line to hitting budget, of course. So they're highly incentivized to maintain that party line. So what we recommend is that you only go to the CEO or CFO if you've exhausted any line items or all options within your existing budget. And there's a lot of creative ways to optimize your internal budget. You could, for example, bring in the expertise you need for a particular bit of legal work through a secondment, and use the additional dollars to fund this initiative. Likewise, if the initiative is like, let's say, automating HR agreements or providing automated solution for marketing collateral review or promotions terms and conditions, there's opportunities there to partner with other functions who perhaps have larger budgets. So the cost of providing promotion terms and conditions, for example, is a rounding error when you look at the total cost of that campaign. It'd be a fraction of 1%. So it's really not a big deal for the head of marketing to say, yeah, look, I'll fund that if it makes my team's jobs easier. Number 5, like what conventional wisdom would be that the more people you socialize this idea, the more stakeholders you get on board, the easier it is to buy this. And so what we see is that general counsel's hope is that if they involve more people in the buying cycle, their team, their boss, their peers, etc., they increase the probability of getting a solution live. Actually, what we find is the complete opposite. Really, if you involve more than 2 people in this decision, it's likely that it'll never happen. Certainly, even if it does happen, it'll extend out the cycle time and the amount of effort you'll need to put into it 3 or 4 times, and it won't actually increase the quality of the decision. So what we recommend our clients do is empathy map it. Okay, so understand what is the role that each stakeholder should have in this decision, and making very clear that you manage those expectations. Because when you go and take an idea like this to the team's going to say, hey, what does this mean for my job? Is this going to be another thing for me to do, or are you trying to replace me? When they have incomplete information, they're going to default to the negative. And let's face it, many lawyers aren't exactly early adopters of technology. When you think about your peers, they're going to say, well, if legal's getting funding for this, I should get funding for my initiative. Or how this often translates is, hey, legal's getting this project funded. Perhaps I can get my little pet project tacked onto the end of it, and I'll leave it to legal to drive that initiative forward. And so they'll say, hey, procurement will say, we want this to generate purchase orders or link in with a REBA, or the finance team says, okay, this is great, but we want this to link into SAP, or the sales guys say, hey, we want you to automate part of our sales process, etc. Very rarely will any of them contribute additional budget for this, and there's often a reason why they haven't done this so far. It's because it's not a key priority for them, but they think if they can get legal to do it, well, it's a win for them. And so when we look at this, we say be very clear about who the stakeholders that you need to get involved in this process, and define that with them. So when you go for budget, you say, who's the economic buyer here? Hopefully it's the general counsel. If you don't have budget, there's obviously going to be a CFO or a CEO or maybe a GM involved who is the budget holder. So the only question you've got to ask them is, can they fund it? Is this a good enough business case to get funding? There's a technical evaluator. Again, we hope that this is the general counsel, but there may be someone on your team that you need to use to evaluate, does this do the job? Because you're not close enough to it. IT, if you get IT involved, they're going to come at this with two key biases. One, they're going to say, hey, we've got a mandate from the CEO from the CIO to reduce the adoption of new technology because we're concerned about that we'll have to support that technology. The second thing is they're going to have a particularly crazy bias, which is that they have friends, no doubt, who are working in startups who are doing cool things. They want to have something to add to their CV, because saying that they've just been maintaining Microsoft products, it doesn't look particularly good on your CV. And so they're going to try and sell you they can build a solution themselves for you on SharePoint or some other system, which invariably never works. So you need to be very clear with IT and say they have one very simple role, and that is just to ensure that the solution meets the security standards of the organization. The more roles the GC owns, the better. And one of the biggest problems we see here is when people get confused about their role. So you allow IT to feel that they're making the decision, or a person on your team making the decision, etc. Ultimately, this is a critical decision for the legal function. The GC needs to own it. We mentioned this before, but if you need to sell to get additional resources, ultimately the business case has to be centered on what is the business impact. Now, a small proportion of that impact could be linked to the impact of the business, so the impact on the legal function, but ultimately, and sadly, the CFO does not care about lawyers. So we'll talk in a moment about some of the categories in which we see good business cases, but just remember that you need to be able to demonstrate how this helps the business make more money or save cost ultimately. Finally, you'll be vastly more successful if you can link this to a key strategic initiative. If the CEO is on a cost drive, how do you support cost? You know, if there's a drive around digitizing or shortening the sales cycle or improving governance, linking it back to that strategic initiative is going to dramatically increase the chances of getting funding. Here are the elements of a good business case. One, as I mentioned, reduces costs. So obviously reducing external spend, replacing existing vendors, reducing a requirement for additional headcount, etc. It shortens cycle times. This is one we love. So how does it shorten sales cycles, hiring cycles, opening a new store if you're a retail company, contract approval cycles? That's a big one because there's thousands of contracts thrown through the organization. If you can show how you can shorten the amount of time it takes for contracts to get signed and approved, that's a really high ROI. It'll increase productivity, you know, particularly business productivity. So if you can say to the head of sales, hey, I'm going to be able to save your sales guys an hour per deal, that's a material difference across a couple of hundred reps. If you can say, hey, it used to take us 4 hours to hire a new employee, we're going to bring that down to 10 minutes again. If you can make it clear that we'll make all contracts in the organization digitized and searchable, again, big productivity lift. Fourth, how will improve governance? Now, I wouldn't lean too much on this one because, yes, everyone cares about this, but hey, no one really cares about this. But if you can show that managing risk and improving the management of contract life cycles as an example, will materially improve the governance of your organization, reduce risk. That's naturally a good thing, particularly if you report through to a head of governance and risk. The final thought we have is this quote from Michael Bloomberg: "In God we trust, but for everyone else bring data." So qualitative business cases are good, but what is vastly better is if you can tangibly show this is the difference we're going to make to the business, and put it in dollars and cents, and then say, we're going to come back to you in 6 months and we're going to report on how much progress we've made on that. you're going to have dramatically a greater success. Ultimately, every business person likes a business case that says, hey, we spend $1 here, we're going to get 2 or 3 back. Finally, good vendors will help you on this. One of the things that we see, and it surprises us, is that people keep their cards very close to the chest. If you don't trust a vendor enough to share kind of what's the process, who are the stakeholders, what you need to improve, you probably shouldn't work with them. Likewise, that vendor should have really great experience working with other organizations to help make this a successful process. And ultimately, you all benefit from that. So we encourage our clients or prospective clients to be very transparent with us about what needs to happen, listen to our guidance on how to make that more likely to succeed. And then we provide them tools and templates. Business cases will, in fact, help build out the business case for them and then help them take that forward internally, because we recognize this is not something general counsels do every day. Finally, if we have a huge amount of resources, so please come to our website, our insights page. You'll see ROI calculators, business case templates, and a whole lot of tips and tricks about how to solve this and other problems in your journey.